What's going on, go-getters? In this week's episode, we talked to Nick Hutchinson, the founder of BookThinkers, a business that focuses primarily on personal development through books.
I've been following Nick for some time now, and it's crazy because he's had the privilege to talk to some of the world's smartest people. He's talked to Grant Cardone, Gary Vee, Dan Bilzerian, Patrick Bet-David, the list goes on. It was an awesome conversation.
Absolutely, guys. And this was our first podcast on Zoom, so make sure you stick it out to the end and let us know what you guys think about that. Hopefully do more of these in the future if you guys enjoy.
Let's go.
Stay tuned. Much love.
All right, you're on the Go-Getters podcast. Nick Hutchinson.
What's up, guys?
Hey, man.
Listen, my life is amazing. I'm happy to be here with you two. There's nothing else I'd rather be doing. So I'm a happy camper.
Thank you, man.
Dude, I really appreciate you coming and doing this podcast. I've been a fan of your Instagram page for quite a while now, and a lot of my books, a lot of the inspiration for where I read my books is from your page. So thank you giving me this time, dude. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, love to hear that. Love to hear that. Listen, books totally changed my life. I didn't think they would, but they did. And so I'm just I'm happy to be here and chat about books. Whatever you guys want to know, whatever you want to talk about, I'm all yours.
Let's do it. Let's get right into it. So Nick, how did you get into books, and like what made you continue to pursue reading after maybe your first couple books that you've read? And then from there, how did you begin to utilize that into creating your livelihood today?
Sure. So stop me whenever you want, because I can tend to talk for a long time, especially on this subject. But when I go back to when I was a high school student, I was not a reader. I was not a good student. I was more of the jock stereotype. I played football. I was captain of the wrestling team. And although I knew I wanted to be in business, I didn't create a correlation between like self-education or education in general and being successful in business at the time. And so I was having fun. I was playing sports, whatever. I went to school, and I actually ran my own house painting business for 2 years when I was in college. So I hired a bunch of my friends. I did door-to-door sales. I started to get comfortable in the world of business, but I sort of maxed out my potential. And so I went to my local career fair at the college, and I ended up finding this sales internship with a local software company. Now, this is where the story really begins, but I wanted to give you that backstory that I was not a reader, but I was interested and ambitious. And so I take this sales internship and I show up, and they really don't have much for me to do. But I went on a couple local trips with my sales boss at the time, and he would put on these business podcasts. Now we're talking 2016, about 2016, maybe late 2015, early 2016. And I was going on these business trips with him. He's putting on these podcasts. They're fascinating. I'm listening to people who I want to be like talk about all things business. But what was interesting was I started to notice all the guests were talking about books, and I was just not into books at all. But I wanted to be like these people. And so I started turning on the podcast for my commute to and from that internship, that job that I had. That first summer, and everybody's talking about books. I took a lunch break and I went to my local Barnes and Noble at the time in Newington, New Hampshire, and I got a couple of books. And because I didn't have much to do at that internship, I actually spent a lot of time reading at that internship. Now, that was between my junior and senior year in college. I went back my senior year, and I went from somebody who was like insecure to talk about money and business to somebody who is leading those discussions after just reading a handful of books. Now I have a book club with some of my buddies. I'm starting to share all this information with everybody around me. Life's going a lot better as a result of these books. And so over the next couple of years, I just started sharing it with more friends and family. They encouraged me to share it more publicly. And that's sort of how BookThinkers came to be. Now, I could ramble on and on and on about all the details there, but I think the most interesting thing for me in the very beginning was that I went from like insecure around the subject of money to very secure in leading conversations after just a couple of books. And I thought to myself, like, what other areas of my life can I apply this to? What else exists? These people are condensing decades of information into days of potential application.
Right.
They spend 20, 30, 40, 50 years researching a subject and experiencing it, and then telling you how to avoid obstacles and the shortcut to success. And I'm like, what? This exists? So that's kind of how I got into it.
So how about then falling in love with books and then them being a passion of yours and then creating a business behind your passion?
Yeah, I was entrepreneurial. Like I had run that house painting business, and I had gotten into this sales position, which I always think of sales as like entrepreneurship, because you're within a business, but you're really responsible for creating your own outcomes. And so you get to try things out, test things out, whatever. Um, I'm reading these books. I started to read books like The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss and other books on entrepreneurship. And it just, hey, that's what's up. I love that. That book changed my life. I even have tattoos from it.
Yeah.
But, I was just reading about designing your own reality, designing your own lifestyle. Reality is negotiable, as Tim says in that book. And I started to become more aware of the things that fueled me. And I think control over my own schedule, control over the things that I focus on, feeding my core values on a daily basis. There's nothing wrong with working for other people, whether it's full time or in a smaller capacity, but you're really working to create somebody else's dream life. And for me, I just didn't sit well. So anyway, I had this seed of entrepreneurship, and there's a book called WTF by Brian Scudamore, and he says that you don't always have to have a pre-existing passion to create a business. Sometimes you just need to be consistent, and the passion will come from consistency. And that's sort of what happened for me, right? Like, I didn't love books when I was in high school or college, but I started reading them. I had this immediate impact. And then I married that with the desire to be an entrepreneur. And I just started this side hustle, which actually I had a couple of friends in the business at the time when it first started back in 2017. I just started sharing these books and these books and these books. And at about 10,000 followers, after a couple of failed business attempts to monetize BookThinkers, I had a couple of authors reach out to me and say, hey, your audience is getting pretty big. We'd love to pay you to review our books. And so that, in those first couple of inbound DMs all happened around the same time. And I'm like, there's a monetization opportunity here. Like, I've got this audience, people want to get in front of it. They're willing to pay me to read books that I'm already reading for free. And they're basically paying me for an opportunity for them to be my mentors as well, right? Like, these people are amazing and they've written books and they have so much to teach me. And now they want to pay me to read their books and review it. So I started doing that. And I just, anytime somebody asked me to review a book or asked me to do some sort of complimentary service or activity, I just said yes, and I figured it out. And so in 2020, I reviewed over 100 books, paid books. In 2021, same thing. So it just, I never planned on creating a business through social media, but it's just sort of happened organically. Like, people saw value. They pointed it out to me. They said, hey, the door is open. You just need to walk through it. They paid me to walk through it, and the rest is history. And so now BookThinkers does a lot of different things for authors. Those are our main clients. And we're now a full-time team of 4, which is really cool. We do a lot of other stuff outside of just book reviews, but yeah, entrepreneurship can happen in so many different ways. And that's kind of how it happened for me.
Dude, that is impressive. And it's crazy because your business is essentially a hack. Like, you have the opportunity to grow as an individual and connect with some of the world's smartest people while also traveling simultaneously. It doesn't always work like that. And that is incredible. Like, you ultimately designed your lifestyle. And I really admire that in a way. And you said you get to work with a lot of really cool authors. And I have some written down here. Like, you've worked with Patrick Bet-David, Robert Greene, Jordan Peterson, Grant Cardone. What's it like?
Some big names.
What's it like getting to pick the brains of those guys? And how does that like tweak your perspective? Because these guys are essentially some of the wisest. They're genius among us. And what's it like being around those guys and be able to pick their brains?
Oh, well, number one, it's amazing. I mean, for your viewers or listeners today that don't know, BookThinkers also has a podcast. And so just like you said, the business itself is kind of like a hack, but the podcast is a great example of it. It's very clear. Somebody like Grant Cardone gives me an hour of his time and mentors me personally. And in exchange, I'm putting him in front of a large audience of nonfiction book lovers that may or may not be following him. And so the value exchange makes a lot of sense for Grant, and it makes a lot of sense for me. But I'm also, I'm not interviewing people about politics or something. I'm interviewing about how can I improve my own business? How can, like, I got to meet up with Patrick Bet-David, and after we recorded our podcast, he just kind of like sat back in his chair and he's like, so what can I help with? I'm like,
that's crazy.
you know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's amazing. I think I've had a lot of different realizations and epiphanies over time.
Mhm.
When you're sitting across a table from somebody like Grant Cardone, who has billions of dollars under management, or
Mhm.
somebody like Robert Greene, who has 6 New York Times #1 bestsellers, and he has one of the most famous books on the planet.
Mhm.
It's fascinating, but at the same time, you realize nothing's as fancy as it seems. They're just normal
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and they stayed in the game a little bit longer. They took more risks. They invested in personal education a little bit more. They read more, whatever the case is. You know, I always say, like, Grant Cardone, it's hard to measure his energy or even try to articulate it to you because it's so off the charts. Like, you sit across from him in person and he's
Yeah.
looking you in the eyes and you're just like, I've made it,
What in the world?
like he has that effect on everybody he's around.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. He has a really cool story too. He came from rags to riches, right?
Yeah.
He was at one point poor in his life, and he
Yeah,
figured it out.
he had to go to rehab, I think, in his late 20s and
Wow.
get his life figured out. So yeah, there's and he's got all the energy in the world. He's in his 60s right now.
Yeah, dude, how about it? So, beyond business, is there any life philosophies that you've accumulated as you began reading books and stuff like that? I know you're interested in Stoic philosophy, so something like that in particular. Is there something like that that really changed the way that you look at life?
Yeah, Stoic philosophy is a great example. And I just got back from both Athens, Greece, as well as Rome, Italy, two of the places where Stoicism really took root and started to blossom as a philosophy.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you about two of the tattoos that I got while I was there, because that's
Mm.
part of, like, I love to collect tattoo souvenirs. And so on
Wow.
my arm right here, I have a tattoo that says Amor Fati, which translated from Latin to English means something like a love of one's fate. And a love of one's fate is a Stoic concept that nothing is inherently good or bad. It just is what it is. And so for me, I remember being in high school and college and being very emotionally reactive.
Mhm.
I kind of had a temper
Mm.
and a switch. And I think a lot of that stems from uh, like a control type thing where you want to control the outside world. And when it doesn't go according to your plan, you sort of lose control of your emotional
Yeah.
stability, and you might get sad or angry or whatever. But the Stoics teach, listen, anything that's outside of your sphere of control,
Mm.
not only do you not control it, so it shouldn't be allowed to shake you at your core, but
Mhm.
you should actually love it. And they take it as far as loving things that we might think are bad today. And so, yeah, it's a constant reminder, the love of one's fate, to love every outcome in every area of your life. Practice gratitude, show appreciation, even when times are tough and things are just better. One of my favorite quotes is from this Indian monk named Gaur Gopaldas. And he says, it's not happy people that are grateful, but it's grateful people that are happy. It's people that intentionally focus on gratitude that are happy, not the other way around. And so you can have the good life. You just need to focus on the good, and then life is good. And so that's one example of a Stoic philosophy thing that I've implemented. On this wrist, I got a tattoo of a word called ataraxia. And that translates to, like, so kind of in that same world of emotional regulation. I I've over the last like 7 years, as the result of reading so many books, I've started to practice things like mindfulness and meditation.
Mm.
I've probably sat down like this and meditated, 1,000 times at least. And
Right.
that's increased the space between an input to my brain and a reaction to the input. So I have more time to process. I've become more logical and less emotional. And that not only helps in the world of business, but it helps in every relationship that you have, with family members, with loved ones, with friends, things like that. You combine it with an inherent love for whatever the input is, and then you get to process that gratitude before you react.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, life is easier and it's better. I'll give a third one, actually. I have this tattoo on my chest that says
Memento
Memento
mori.
Mori.
Yes,
Mm.
sir.
Yeah. And that's a love of basically the fact that you're going to die. So, yeah, remember your own mortality.
Yeah.
And for me, the average age of an adult male in the US is like 78 or something like that. And so life's not necessarily as long as we all think it's going to be.
Right.
So the fact that the average American consumes between 3 and 4 hours of television / Netflix a day just blows my mind. Like, life is way too short to live through other people's experiences. Like, go have your own experiences. And that's fueled my desire to travel and learn new languages and experience new cultures and live in other countries,
Yeah.
as well as start a business and meet people like Grant and Robert and whoever. So those are a couple of the things that come to mind just in the vein of Stoic philosophy. But
Mhm.
I've also got those thoughts in dozens of other places in my life as a result of the 500 plus books I've read.
Yeah.
So I hope that gives everybody a little taste as to kind of where my mind sits.
No,
Oh,
that's
no.
beautiful, man. I appreciate that. Really. I remember once upon a time you were talking about, I was watching the video of yours. You were talking about some of the most impactful books in your life. And I remember you said one book that I haven't read was called Vagabonding, I believe. And from my understanding, that book's about travel. And I was looking at your one Instagram page, and it says that you've been to 19 countries.
Crazy.
Which is insane. So is there any unique way in which traveling has altered your perspective or changed the way that you look at the world?
Yeah, 1,000%. There's a line inside of that book, Vagabonding, where he says, where Rolf Potts, the author, says something along the lines of, you should be a Columbus to whole new continents within you. And that's what travel allows you to do, is you can go out and explore and find new places within yourself, like within your own brain. And so after reading the 4-Hour Work Week, I attempted to follow Tim's footsteps to verify that you could actually implement that book and that what he did was reasonable. And I literally went to Argentina for 5 weeks by myself. It was my first time solo traveling. And I just bought the round trip plane tickets, and I said I'd figure out the rest when I got there. And so I learned so much about myself in the first day. So many things that I took for granted while I was growing up here, sort of in like a middle-class family, suburban household, that immediately I was like slapped in the face when I went to Argentina by myself. And I discovered this level of like almost like grit or willingness to embrace discomfort that didn't exist before. So imagine this, I land in the airport, and my Airbnb, I didn't realize that the city of Buenos Aires was over an hour away from the airport. So I'm like, well, how am I going to get there? There's no Uber. What am I going to do? So I go out to the taxi line, and nobody speaks English. Why would they? It's at the bottom of South America. People don't speak English. And so I'm like trying to talk to this taxi guy. I'm trying to use Google Translate. I can't get my phone to connect. And he just like grabs my bags and walks to his taxi car. So I'm like, okay, whatever. I don't really have any option here. So I get in the car, and eventually I'm like translating things on my phone. I'm like, do you accept US dollars? He's like, no. I'm like, do you accept a credit card? He's like, no. I'm like, well, I don't have Argentinian pesos or whatever the currency was. Like, how do I deal with these situations? And then I get to my Airbnb, and there's a security desk out front, and nobody speaks English. And they're like, why are you trying to get into our building? And I can't get in touch with the host. And then I try to go get water because you can't drink the tap water. And there's these little markets and stuff, and there's no price tags, and I didn't know where to get cash, and they don't accept credit cards. And I couldn't hear how much money he was telling me because I didn't speak Spanish. It's like all that was within 2 hours of arriving in the country. And I was like, I have 5 more weeks here. Like, what am I going to do? So what I discovered, though, was an ability to operate in different situations that I didn't previously have. And so that book, Vagabonding by Rolf Potts, which was originally recommended by Tim Ferriss, I mean, it changed everything for me. I'm just so much more confident in all these crazy situations because confidence is transferable from one situation to the next. So now I face something completely different, combine it with all that Stoic philosophy stuff I just talked about, and like I'll face whatever, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. That's tough. Just last summer, 2021, I just went to Europe, and it was my first time really out of the country. And I went to Berlin, Germany. I went to Athens, Greece, and I went to Amsterdam for a little while. I went for 3 weeks, and I went with one of my friends who grew up in Germany. I met him on the football team. He was a foreign exchange student. And I remember we were in Greece for 6 days, and we didn't speak the language. Luckily enough, they spoke English. But you talk about grit. I mean, for 5-6 days, we ate nothing but oranges, peanut butter, and bread. So it really does teach you a good amount about yourself, and that's incredible. I got to read that book, and I got to travel more too. That's awesome.
Yeah,
But
in Athens, did you go visit like the Acropolis and
yeah,
stuff and see the part? Yeah,
yeah, that
super
was
cool.
incredible, man. I mean, insane. I like the square too, like the square in Athens where there's a lot of stuff going on. There's right off of the square, there's this gyro place, and it was €2.50 for a gyro. Some of the best food I've ever had in my life, and we almost ate that um, until we ran out of money. So
Yeah, I would like right outside of that square is where I got this tattoo. So I was just there a couple months ago too.
yeah, that's awesome. So, do you have a vision for where Book Thinkers goes? Do you have an overall idea, something you're trying to manifest or bring into the world for this business that you have, Book Thinkers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I go back and forth on this a lot. It's interesting because a lot of books and a lot of successful entrepreneurs will tell you to have a very strong vision because they didn't have one,
Hmm.
yet they ended up becoming successful. And so it's kind of one of those things like I wish I had it, but if they had it, would they have been as successful? Because like the vision, I don't know, I've changed so many times and I'm just not confident in having one that's not going to change so much. But I'll tell you what I'm focused on right now.
Okay.
I'm focused on an abundance mindset. Like anything that I want to create, I can create. I know I can create it. I have the resources. I have the team. We're working in that direction. I can tell you that the business needs to be aligned with my core values and I need to enjoy every aspect of it.
Hmm.
And those things are measured and talked about on a weekly basis. And, we do quarterly goals that are pretty rigid. And then I think we do annual goals that are a little bit less rigid. And anything outside of 1 year from now, I have no idea what's going to happen. But Book Thinkers has the chance to continue to impact lives. Like
Heck
I
yeah.
believe that the right book at the right time can change somebody's life. And as long as we're continuing to do that, the vehicle can change. It could be Instagram, it could be the podcast, it could be helping authors get their message out more efficiently, which is what we're primarily focused on right now, or any other mix of whatever comes out in the future. So that's just kind of my thing is like I want to be aligned with my core values. I want to keep helping people connect with the right books that change their lives. And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I like how you said that the right book at the right time can really impact somebody's life. Right before I went to Europe, I read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, I believe that's how you pronounce it. And I was out there feeling like the shepherd boy. I felt like I was on my own like journey in a way, and I was seeing omens in a way, I guess, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
Because it really does make sense. But I remember I also want to give you a shout out too, man. I really appreciate you connecting me with Rajiv because him and I have been in talks and I've been reading his book. And I like what you say about, having those core values for your business, because that's a lot of what he talks about, like identifying what you stand for as a leader and with your business. And I think that's really cool because it forces you to open your mind and to understand what's happening in the world as well. So that's awesome. So if you had to, on the Go Getters podcast, give your Mount Rushmore of books right now, what would you say are the most impactful books that changed your life?
Well, the first book that I ever read was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And I think that book's important to mention because it introduced me to everything else that came after it. So if I had read a different book first, I'm not sure that I would have gotten into this space. Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki talks about the importance of financial literacy.
Mm-hmm.
He says that if you grow up in a poor or middle class family, you're going to learn poor or middle class money habits because the subject of money is not taught in school. Not everybody's on an even playing field. It's taught at home. And I've had a lot of really interesting conversations about why that is recently, which we could dive into if we wanted to, but that's more of an opinion piece. I just think the importance of learning from people who have done what you want to do and who have done it really well many, many, many times over and over is a very important thing to understand. And so if you want to be rich, you got to go learn from rich people. You can't learn from your friends and family who are constantly gossiping about this and that and the other thing, getting absorbed in the news or whatever. Like you've got to define your own pathway and learn from people that have done that too. So Rich Dad Poor Dad, I've read it a couple times and it's totally changed my life. Like sometimes I read it and it's a book about the importance of financial literacy. Sometimes I read it and it's a book about real estate investing. I've purchased a couple multifamily properties as a result of reading that book.
Oh, that's tough.
And
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And who would have thought that? Not me reading it for the first time, right? But
Right.
that's just you learn about this subject over and over, and then it becomes a reality. So that's one of them. You mentioned the 4-hour work week. That's on my list. Certainly because it teaches lifestyle design. It teaches you that anything's possible, it teaches you to optimize a process and then automate, delegate, or eliminate any low impact activities related to it, which I've done. It teaches you to earn in dollars, but spend in pesos and compensate
Yeah.
in rupees,
Yeah.
which is a great lesson. Number three, I'll mention The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. It's one of my all-time favorite books as well. It teaches that the small steps in the right direction over a long period of time can lead to disproportionately positive outcomes.
Mhm.
And so little activity on social media for years all of a sudden compounds into a huge community that can attract people like Grant or whoever you want to work with.
Mhm.
So that's really important too, but it also applies to health and fitness and whatever you're doing in life. So those are kind of like my top three go to. Obviously, vagabonding is up there as well.
Yeah. So I got another question too. It's a personal question. Like, how do you schedule your days? Are your days really like scheduled out, or do you like how does that work being a business owner and also trying to balance? I'm sure. I think you just proposed to your wife, right? I think you're getting married soon, or you did get married, right?
Yeah, I proposed while we were in Greece, and then I'm getting married in Aruba actually next
Wow.
May.
Wow.
So in Aruba in May. Um, how do I schedule my days? Well, this has changed a lot over time too. I think every entrepreneur kind of swings between both ends of the spectrum of like super scheduled and not scheduled at all. And like
Mm-hmm.
eventually you'll probably end up somewhere directly in the middle, but you kind of got to swing from side to side until you figure it out. And right now I'm in one of those kind of less rigid schedule parts of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've had morning routines that literally had 20 steps and I followed it religiously before my day kicked off. And then I time blocked, this period of time is for social creation. This period of time is for team management. This period of whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and would plan out the entire week in advance. Right now, I'm just I'm just kind of like in the flow. Like I use this little Pomodoro clock to set 20-minute time increments, and then I just press go and I just
Oh,
focus on an activity with no distractions for 20 minutes. And that priority shifts throughout the day. And the Calendly link that you used to book this meeting
mhm.
is something that I continue to focus on as well. So I only allow Calendly meetings, like other people, to grab time on my calendar in certain times of the day, certain days of the week, depending on the meeting invite. And so I kind of have some rules around that. But yeah, right now it's a mix of putting out fires and prioritizing my time. I don't do any meetings before 10 a.m. That's one of my rules. So
Mm.
morning routine, gym, sauna, all that stuff gets done before the work day every day of the week.
And then you have your own business schedule as well, like things you have to do for social media and people, like maybe emails or stuff like that. How does your business schedule work?
Yeah, in a similar way, like I don't do any business before 10 a.m. unless it's posting on social media. But actually, starting October 1st, I'm not even going to be the one that's in the BookThinkers Instagram anymore because it's become one of those activities that can be outsourced, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll still be me creating content and distributing it to the team who will then post it on all the different platforms for me. So that's pretty cool. We actually do that for a number of other authors right now as well. Um, and yeah, I'm focused on working on the business instead of in the business,
Mm-hmm.
which is a big difference.
Yeah.
Working in the business requires me to post on social media and answer emails all day long and, host podcasts and schedule things and reach out to people and whatever. Working on the business is like, here's how much what revenue we have, here's where it's coming from, here's how we do account management. I'm going to improve all of these processes by optimizing what's already been delegated and making sure that it works smoother so that we can fit more authors into the schedule, help more people, improve profits, like those types of things. So I've just got different projects that I work on between meetings and free time throughout the week. And I'm, like I said, even from a business perspective, I'm still in one of those kind of like not super structured modes right now because I went to Europe for a couple of months and I've got a couple more international things popping up. And it's like, I just haven't gotten back into that super rigid routine yet.
That's awesome, man. I mean, that's crazy because you're really doing it. That's awesome. And we're just two young kids out here just trying to, figure something out. So, and it's awesome.
Hey, not so much younger than I was when everything started, right? I mean, I'm 28 now.
Yeah.
And a lot can happen in a few years. I mean, I think back a couple of years ago, and that version of me probably wouldn't recognize this version of me.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm 21, he's 20, and I started reading, I think at 19, and I think the first book that I picked up was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I read that, and at the time I was working at like a department store, and I remember thinking to myself, like, each person I interact with, my previous mindset was, oh, this person is bothering me. I have to deal with this customer, this and that. But after reading that book, I understood that these are opportunities. In each one of these people that I meet, I can experiment with what it is that I'm learning. And I'm watching as I'm trying these new techniques out that Dale Carnegie was talking about. These people's gears are starting to turn. There's light bulbs in their head and it's working, and I'm appealing to people now. And after that, that's when I kind of started to read as well. I was wondering, there's books on everything in the world. Somebody wrote a book on absolutely everything. So I wonder how everything else can affect my life. So that's really, really cool. How about favorite countries? What is your Mount Rushmore for countries?
Yeah, so far, I think my favorite travel experience was 3 months in Colombia.
Wow.
Colombia, South America, mostly in Medellin, which is funny because we think about like Pablo Escobar and drug cartels and stuff, but that was 20 years ago, and it's very different today. I think whenever I think about the 4-hour work week, or whenever I think about my love for travel, I picture myself waking up super early, going down to one of the main streets, sitting in a coffee shop, sipping on some of the best coffee in the world, and just reading or watching people go by, doing work on my laptop, whatever. And it's so green and so peaceful, and everybody's so nice, and there's so much to do. It's just, I don't know, that's kind of like my magical go-to destination. And I wouldn't be surprised if my now fiance, future wife, and I end up purchasing real estate in Colombia in the future, because I'd love to go for 3 months every year or something like that.
Dang.
And where are some other countries you would still like to visit?
Still like to visit. I haven't visited any Asian countries yet, so I'd love to visit Japan. I'd love to visit South Korea. I'd love to visit Vietnam. I'd love to visit Indonesia. A lot of those types of places are definitely on my list. My fiance works a job that requires more Eastern Standard Time scheduling.
Yeah.
And so if we go to Asia for any extended period of time, it's going to be like a backward sleep schedule.
Yeah.
Europe was cool because we went for a couple months, and she would just like, we'd have basically until like 3 p.m. to goof off and do whatever. We could like go do a full excursion, a full tour, or whatever, and then start the work day for her. And that was really easy. So yeah, I think those Asian countries are places that I really want to visit. And then, extravagant places. I want to go visit the Galapagos. I want to visit Easter Island. I want to visit places that are hard to get to and still pretty remote, And then also African countries. I still haven't visited any African countries yet. And I have a number of friends that are originally born in African countries that go back every couple of years. And like, I'd love to tag on to some of those trips. And because that's not something that you typically do growing up in the US, unless you have kind of like a fun reason to go. And so, I can't let those opportunities pass me by.
Oh, do you have a goal for a certain amount of countries you want to reach?
Every country, 195?
That'd be a crazy goal.
I like to say every country. And it's funny because then people go like, well, what about Afghanistan? It's like, well, 20 years ago, the last country on the planet that somebody would want to visit was Colombia.
Yeah.
And
True.
And 20 years later, times change. Like, it's one of the most beautiful travel destinations on the planet. It's a remote workers hub. Like, people from all over the planet travel there and feel totally safe. And so it wouldn't surprise me if countries that we typically think of as dangerous, like Afghanistan, or other countries in the Middle East, become travel destinations in 20 years. So what's funny about that math is, like, you travel to 5 countries a year. For 10 years, you're at 50. You do that for 40 years, you're at your 200 mark.
Oh, wow.
So you can travel to every country on the planet, and it only takes 20 years.
Wow. That's a cool way to look at it. I never really broke it down like that.
How do you balance all that time spent traveling with your workflow?
Most of what I can do is just done behind a computer screen or sort of on the road. So that makes it really nice. And I just, here's one epiphany about travel that most people don't realize is that, and this comes kind of from Vagabonding, which is the uncommon guide to the long-term art of world travel, or something like that as the subtitle. I maintain a normal working schedule, which for me is kind of like 10 a.m. until 5 p.m. type thing. I maintain that when I travel for the most part. But here's the kicker. My mornings and my evenings are not spent in the gym and watching Netflix like they are when I'm at home. They're spent out exploring, trying new foods, trying new restaurants, doing different things. And so the time that we take, it's not taken for granted, it's really wasted at home, is replaced with high leveraged, high impact activities like experimenting and discovering when I'm on the road. So I can still, and I'm motivated by that. Like it makes me really happy to travel. And so I'll put my butt in the chair from 10 to 5, kind of most of the time while I'm traveling, so that I can maintain a normal working schedule, which allows for me to continue to travel and experience new things.
Yeah.
And what's funny about it is like the typical American, let's just say when you guys are a little bit older, you go out to a nice steakhouse or a nice dinner spot and you get a bottle of wine and a couple nice meals and some apps and a dessert. Like that's $200 in the US every time.
True.
And you do that in Colombia and that same experience is like $30.
Wow.
And so you can do it every night of the week and it's still the same price. And that's why you can do it more. You can experiment more. You can go out to breakfast every day and it only costs $5 instead of $20, whatever. So that's kind of another way to look at like, yeah, I can continue to live the same lifestyle, almost on the same budget. It's a little bit more expensive to travel, but almost on the same budget. And, you just maintain your work schedule.
Can you ever see yourself living outside of the US?
I was just going to ask
that. Probably not for more than a couple months at a time.
Yeah.
I'd like to say yes. I think there's plenty that could be improved on culturally in the US. That would lead me to think that I would have more freedom elsewhere. But at the same time, my family is one of my core values and they're all stateside, which makes it very easy to see them. And my fiance and I, after that wedding next year, will probably at least attempt to start a family, which sounds kind of wild. But that'll probably keep us around parents and loved ones and stuff as well. But I think we will try. That's one thing too, is like in my head, at least right now, I've got this idea of homeschooling kids while traveling the world permanently.
Wow.
So yeah, I followed a guy once, or actually I met a guy once who would do like 3 to 6 months in a different country every 3 to 6 months he had like 7 kids, all different ages. And the kids are growing up all over the world, having friends in different places. And like I think like 3 to 6 months of the year, they always had like a home base somewhere back in the US where like the kids had more permanent friendships and sporting opportunities and stuff. But like half the year plus they were traveling in all these different countries. And I was like, how cool is that? I could see a lifestyle like that in the future.
What a way to grow up, huh? I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, that would be insane.
We're from a small town here and we got to get away. We got to get out for a little bit to see the world. That sounds like such a cool way to live.
And where is your town?
You ever heard of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania?
No, but I know Pennsylvania.
You know, Scranton.
Pennsylvania is pretty wide. Yeah, no, I do. I've actually stayed in Scranton because I drove one time from Austin, Texas back to Boston, and we had like 4 stops on the way. And I stayed in Scranton.
Yeah, we're 20 minutes from Scranton.
Okay, cool.
Like The Office, right?
Yeah, The Office. Yeah.
Dude, the way you live is very impressive, and I one day want to mimic that. I want to be able to travel, and I want to be able to do that stuff. And hopefully, this year is an opportunity. What we're doing now, the Go Getters podcast, is an opportunity to do that as well. We might go to visit Rajiv in Southern California, which would be awesome. And then we have an opportunity as well. I'm not sure if you've covered this book, but have you ever heard of the book "The Great Man Is Dead"? by Rob Cross?
No, but maybe, because it sounds very familiar.
There's an Instagram page within your same niche. I think it's called Unleash the Knowledge.
Yeah, Owen.
Yeah.
Owen runs Unleash the Knowledge. Yeah, he's cool.
Yeah. And it's an orange book. I wish I brought it up, but that Rob Cross guy sent me the book, and I think it'd be a cool connection. I wonder if I reached out to him, he'd be interested in letting us come to the UK and do a podcast with him.
I'm sure he would. The UK is cool. Yeah, you guys should go visit Rajiv. I've visited him a couple of times. We work with him in a few different ways. BookThinkers does. And then I'm happy to make some additional intros. We're starting to bring on some clients that we do podcast bookings for. So like we'll introduce them to people like you so that they can share their books and stuff like that. And where Rajiv lives is a beautiful area. So if you've never been to the West Coast or like LA in general, he could show you a good time.
Wow, man, that sounds crazy.
He said he would set us up with some of his acquaintances at
UCLA,
USC, and then YPO, which is I don't know what exactly that is.
Young Presidents Organization.
Yeah, what is that? Like a organization for presidents throughout different companies in that area?
Yes, but their minimum standards for applying to get into the group are pretty crazy. Like you've got to be running a multi-million-dollar business. You have to be the CEO of it or the founder. Like it's
wow, man.
Yeah, it's pretty elite. And Rajiv is very involved with them. So
yeah. So what does he do? His business 1105 Media. He has it's what he calls it business to business, where he helps connect different businesses for different services, I suppose.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not as familiar with that business as I am his book Chase Greatness and sort of like what he teaches there. But yeah, it's a big company. It's got a couple hundred employees, I think. And his role is managing the management team, I think.
Yeah, he's cool, man. I've seen pictures with him and Richard Branson.
Yeah, he was just at Necker Island. That's somebody who I'd love to interview one day in a place that I'd like to visit. I think that entire story, I don't know if you've read any of his books, but Richard Branson's a really inspirational guy.
No, I haven't read anything about him. I know he's Virgin Airlines, right? And then there's Virgin Mobile. I know that's under his umbrella of creation. I don't know much about him though. I'll have to do my due diligence.
Yeah, he owns well over 100 companies, I'm pretty sure. And one of the biggest ones was Virgin Records back in the day, like physical records and Virgin Music. And yeah, he's got a crazy story. But anybody that owns an island and is a billionaire that surfs around with presidents and stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. How was it talking to Dan Bilzerian? I thought that was an interesting podcast that I listened to. So it seemed like the dynamics were a bit different there. So how was that?
Yeah, it was interesting. I told Tim before we press record that it would have to be a more serious conversation. And he was like, yeah, man, like I'm totally phasing out of that area of my life and into a more serious, conversationally depth, like focused area of my life, however he put it. But then when we press record, he still kind of just went off on these tangents that actually, I mean, I left some of them in the BookThinkers podcast that you can see, but I deleted a lot as well that just were a little too rated R for our audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a good example of somebody that a lot of people hate. Just like generally speaking, you look at his Instagram and you hate him. But one of the things that these books have taught me, like going back to your what perspectives have you adopted type of question, is that you can learn something from anybody on the planet.
Yes.
And you don't have to like them. It's like separating the player from the game. Like they can be a great athlete. You don't have to love what they do off the field, but you can still appreciate what you see on the field. Yeah. You could separate the two. And I think the same thing can happen in business. Like you might not like everything that Dan does in his personal life or how he brands himself, but he's one of the world's best personal branding experts on the planet. Like you can learn something from somebody who's top 5 or top 10 in one of the most popular subjects in the world, like personal branding. And so, yeah, I just, that was really cool. I mean, anybody that's got like 30 million followers is doing something right.
Yeah.
Was he able to change any preconceived notion you had about him?
That's a good question. You know, that opportunity came to be because another author that I interviewed is really good friends with him. And so when the book was coming out, he asked like, "Hey, do you want to interview him?" And I was like very nonchalantly, and I was like, "Yeah, that would be awesome." I read his book prior to the interview, and that didn't change any preconceived notions. But I think talking to him, yeah, he's just more calm, more focused, has a lot more insecurities than I think you would see just in a picture post on Instagram. You know, you guys listened to it or watched it, so you could probably tell that like he's in touch, he's aware.
Oh yeah.
I think sometimes you look at somebody like that and you're like, they're just drunk 24/7, high 24/7, being an idiot. And that's not the reality of it. That's just what you see on social media.
That's interesting. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, how many more of these big name guys do you see yourself taking down in the recent or in the months to come? I guess I should say. Is there anybody else on that list that like you got to get knocked off?
I mean, there definitely are names on there, but I'm not really like right now when you ask about like my day and what I'm focused on, I'm not really focused on the podcast anymore. The podcast, like kind of what gets you here won't necessarily get you there. I think for me, the podcast built a level of credibility that I can stand on to build a huge business from. And like, I'm focused on that. Like, we'll continue to do podcast interviews. I brought somebody on to co-host a lot of podcasts with me now. His name's Luke, and Luke works for the business of BookThinkers. But I mean, I'll toss some names out there since you asked. Like, I'd love to speak with Tony Robbins. I think that would be a lot of fun. I'd love to speak with Oprah, obviously. I'd love to speak with Tim Ferriss. That would be an amazing conversation. You know, those are some of the people that sit at the top of my list.
Did you ever meet Ryan Holiday? I'm unsure if
I believe you did a podcast
with Ryan.
He's been on the podcast. Yeah. And that, I mean, that's an interesting one. You know, sometimes you build people up in your head and then they're not as engaging or as enthused when they're speaking to you. And I'm sure he had like 15 other podcasts that day. He was in the middle of book promotion mode. But when I met him, it just, you know, there wasn't the warm and fuzzy feeling that I thought I was going to get from somebody who have read 8 of his books and implemented so much, and it's totally changed my life. And then sometimes you meet somebody and then, you know, conversation doesn't go super well. So that's kind of what happened with the Ryan podcast, but I'm sure I'll get a chance to do something else with him in the future.
Yeah, that's really cool. How long does it usually take you to finish a book? Because for me, it's been taking me a while. So how long does it usually take you?
Sorry, your audio cut out there for a second. Can you ask the question again? Was it how long do you ask that again?
How long does it usually take you to finish a book?
Good question. Reading is like any other skill. The more you do it naturally, the better you're going to get at it. And so for me, I was a very, 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 very slow reader when I was first starting out. And now I read very, very, very fast. But that's what happens when you read 500 physical paper books from cover to cover.
That's insane.
So how long does it take me? You know, I can read sometimes if I'm not taking a lot of notes and highlighting a lot of stuff from a book, like 2 pages a minute. And so let's just say a 200-page book is like 100 minutes. 100 minutes is just under 2 hours. And so, you know, that's kind of like the average book. So maybe under 2 hours for a full nonfiction book. And yeah, that is pretty fast. But I like to say that kind of getting into the technique a little bit, that reading and taking notes are 2 different activities. And I learned that over a longer period of time. Like, it's kind of multitasking to try to do both. And so what I'll typically do is I'll read a chapter, or I'll read for an amount of time, maybe even it's an entire book, and I'll just bracket off what I think is interesting and what I want to take notes on and go back to, but I won't stop reading. Like, I'll just do it in real time, and then I'll keep reading and try not to reflect on it too much in the moment. I want to understand what the author's saying, all of the background context, and then I'll go back to it when I'm taking my notes or when I'm reflecting on what I've learned. And then I'll go through what I bracketed off, reread it, think about it, that type of stuff. So when I say I read a book in 2 hours, like, I read a book for 2 hours, but then I might take notes and implement and reflect for another couple hours.
That's cool. I got a cool question for you that I actually always wondered. Do you ever plan on writing your own book one day?
Yes. And it'll come out early next year in probably March. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually going to be on the subject that we were just talking about, because the number one question that I get in the DMs is some combination, it's some variation of, hey, I'm reading a lot of books, but they're not changing my life like you said that they could.
Right.
So what am I missing? Like, how do I implement what I'm learning?
Right.
And so that's something that just naturally happened with me. I was actually that summer internship, going way back to the first minute of our conversation, the software that I was selling, you would sell it and then it would take 4 to 12 weeks to implement the software. And so naturally I'm reading these books and then there's like a phase of implementation that follows it that I just naturally felt like, I don't know, I was just kind of doing that from day one. And a lot of other people, they'll read a book and then they'll take all these notes in it and then they'll just put it down and move on to the next book, and they won't go back to it or consciously, intentionally implement anything from it. And so they're missing out on everything that they just learned. And I like to say that, like, if you read a good book and you don't consciously change your behavior, then it was just a form of entertainment, not education, because education leads to behavior change. And anyway, the book will be all about how to retain and implement more information from the books you're reading.
Oh, wow, cool.
That's sick, man. Do you have a title or anything? Or is that even available yet?
I have a working title, but I'm not sure that it's going to stick. So I'll keep it hidden for now. I've probably mentioned it out there before, but I don't know. I'm thinking of changing it. So I'm not sure yet. But yeah, how to, like, I think books can, obviously, the right book at the right time can change your life. Like, books can change lives. All of the information exists. And then if I can give you the frameworks to plug your biggest takeaways into that lead to behavior change, that's kind of the gap that I'm trying to fill there. And so I don't know what the title is going to be yet, but you guys know the subject matter at least now.
Cool.
That's cool, man.
So we're at 54 minutes, 55 minutes. So I know you got to go soon, but I got one question for you that I think anybody can benefit from. So what would be your advice to a 20-year-old man on how to go about personal finance, how to start to accumulate wealth for yourself and stuff like that?
I would read the book, I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. And one of my biggest takeaways, well, there's so many takeaways. So you asked for biggest piece of advice, automate things. So money hits your bank account from however you make money, and it gets automatically distributed outside of that bank account to other places so that you can't touch it. So Pareto's principle states that the amount of time that you give a task, it will expand to that amount of time, right? So if you're given a week to do a homework assignment, you're going to do it in the 7th day. But if you're only given a day, you would do it in that day, right? Money works the same way. So if you're given $50,000 a year, you're going to spend $50,000 a year. So what you got to do is you've got to make less money. Once it hits your bank account, you've got to distribute portions of that to other places for emergency funds and investment accounts and things like that, so that you never even see it. And then you can't expand up to that, let's just say $50,000 mark. You only give yourself the ability to spend 30 and the other 20 goes elsewhere. Like that changed the game for me. And I'm not a personal finance expert and I don't know how to articulate it that well, but I would say go read that book and it'll make a lot more sense.
I Will Teach You to Be Rich by, who's that again?
Ramit, Ramit. And then last name Sethi, like Sethi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but I think I heard somebody say Ramit Sethi once. So I Will Teach You to Be Rich. And I'll just give one other piece of advice from that book, which was really nice. He said, cut ruthlessly on the things that don't matter in your life, but spend on the things that do. And so I think a lot of times, especially in your 20s, like a 20-year-old man thinks, oh man, like I can't live a fun life. I've got to save all my money. No, not necessarily. You can still splurge on the things that you enjoy as long as you cut ruthlessly on the things that you don't enjoy. And for me, you know, I wasn't making as much money back then, obviously, when I started to travel. So it was like splurge on travel, but stop partying so much in Boston or wherever I was, because that money, it doesn't fulfill me. You wake up the next morning, you're hungover, you don't even, you got in a fight with one of your friends, like whatever. It's just not fulfilling money. And you got to cut that out. But that allows you to spend on other things that fulfill you, like travel or whatever.
Yeah. Cool.
So
awesome. One more thing.
Yeah. All right, go.
Okay. Did you have to sacrifice anything to have the life that you have now at 28 years old? Is there any major sacrifices that you made, or is there anything that you had to let go of to be the person you are today?
Yeah, I had to remove ego, and I also had to remove insecurity, which kind of sit at two opposite ends of the spectrum.
Oh.
So I had to lose both of those things. But I'll tell you what, like Jocko Willink says, discipline equals freedom. It sounds counterintuitive, but the more disciplined you are, the more free you become. So did I have to lose or give up anything? No. Everything's amazing. My health is great. My wealth is great. My relationships are great. My happiness is great. No, like I think you can have your cake and eat it too, in a way.
Dope. Nick Hutchinson.
Yeah. Well, man, you're a truly inspirational character, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you so much for giving me an hour of your time and coming on our podcast. We will share it as soon as possible. You know when it's going to be out?
I'll say in about 2 weeks.
It'll be out in 2 weeks.
Super cool, guys. Yeah, just tag BookThinkers or tag Nick Loves Books, and I'll repost whatever you guys post.
Thank you, man.
Thank you so much
for your time.
One day I'll see you in some country. Maybe we'll see. But have a blessed life, man. Have a blessed rest of your day. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. And shout out to BookThinkers.
Super cool. Yeah, really thank you.
Any other thing you want to plug before we leave?
No, just if anybody has any, if anybody's facing anything that's a major difficulty in their life and you need a good book recommendation, hit me up with your problem and I got a solution.
That's dope, man. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. One love. Thank you so much. See you, Nick.
Hold on.
All right. Well, I know you're still recording, but you could just try.